Do you like Slay the Spire? Well, what if I told you there was a similar deck-building roguelike, but you can move? Alina of the Arena is an indie game that fully released back in October of 2022, and I've had basically no one talking about it. None of these are real, they don't count, ignore them. So I thought I'd change that. Whether you're a pyromaniac, want to stab someone as much as your average Bloodborne character, or just want really big numbers, you'll probably find something you like in this game. So like, subscribe, and prepare yourself for a bunch of Slay the Spire comparisons. In Alina of the Arena, which I'm just going to shorten to Alta, you play Alina. Alina is a very talented fighter and can therefore use 8 different classes. There's Default, Hoarder, Basic Bitch, British, Coward, Pyro, ADHD, and Loser. Unlike Slay the Spire, the different cards you can get aren't limited by your class. Any class can use any card. What a class does is change your starting deck and give you a special passive. For example, on Slave you restore 4 HP before every fight, but on Pyromancer you gain 1 energy if you start your turn on a flaming tile. Some passives are simpler than others. Once you've selected how you'd like to slay your enemies, we can move on to actually slaying them. As I mentioned, you can move in this game. You exist on a grid in the shape of a hexagon, because it's the closest I can get to a circle, and to move around you need to play cards. You get 1 movement card at the beginning of every turn by default, and there's a bunch of special movement cards that you can add to your deck. Unless you play a tank, the movement in this game is super important because it's the only way you're not going to die. Enemies in this game will try to hit you, and your goal is to avoid that. However, there are many different ways of avoiding that. Obviously, you can just move out of the way, but you're also able to move most of your enemies. This has 2 major applications other than them not hitting you. You can make enemies hit each other, and you can slam enemies against each other or the walls to stun them, giving you free turns to just beat the shit out of them. Another essential tool for slaughtering your enemies are tools. You can buy items from the shops, or just pick them up off the ground, with each item doing different things. Weapons are equipable, and will give your cards unique effects. Traps can be placed on the ground to apply debuffs and immobilize enemies. Dusts apply debuffs and interrupt enemies, and there's also a bunch of stuff you can just throw at them. There's also special items you can get at the beginning of the game and after killing bosses that can either give you game-changing passives, or completely doom your run if you pick them. As is with any good roguelike, there's a bunch of different builds, with some cards being an entire build by themselves. My personal favourites are Fire and Bleed. Fire is this game's equivalent of poison, dealing damage at the end of your turn and having a few cards that interact with it in special ways, such as doubling fire damage, increasing the number of stacks enemies gain, or the best card, Ignite. It does damage proportional to the amount of burn the enemy has, burn is what the stacks are called, and spreads the burn to all enemies touching them. With this build, your goal is to stay far, far away, and just let them burn. Bleed has a very different goal. It's another stacking build, but this one is far more up close and personal. Bleed in this game is a debuff that applies extra damage each time you hit an enemy. You want to hit them as many times as possible, every single turn, applying Bleed every time. Since there's also some powers, cards that apply buff to players, they give movement abilities after a certain number of attacks, it can end up with a lot of mobility, making it a very fun, very fast assassin. But the 2 builds also share a weakness, and a weird technical thing. The weakness is they're both stacking builds. If you don't get enough time to set up, you will die. So either you need to find some way to shield yourself, or hope you get some movement cards. The weird technical thing is that burn damage ignores shields, and the attacks in Bandit's starting deck ignore armor, which sounds great on paper, but an important mechanic in this game is armor break. Enemies are stunned after you get rid of all their shields, and for some bosses this is a key mechanic. So sometimes you have to get a bit creative. Or just use Ignite best card, let's fucking go! The build variety in this game is solid. When you combine the different cards with all the different items, you can end up with some pretty weird combos, such as a strength build based off of standing and fire, or a shield build based off of hitting enemies as much as possible. Power cards also go into your exhaust pile rather than disappearing, and since there's ways of getting cards back from your exhaust pile, this gets pretty interesting. No matter what playstyle you like, you should be able to find something that fits you. With all the different builds the game has, you may be wondering if the game has enough challenge for you to actually care. Luckily, it does! There's 4 main difficulties: Rookie, Veteran, Warlord, and Hellwalker. With Hellwalker having a difficulty scale from 1 to 20, kind of similar to Slay the Spire's Ascension system, except you don't have to go up each of the levels individually, you can just pick whichever one you want. With difficulty 20 being absolute bullshit! This is just because of high numbers though, and what really makes difficulty interesting is enemies having special mechanics, which some of them do. Most of the regular fights don't have anything crazy, with most of the complexity coming from enemies having one weird thing they can do, such as only taking damage once per turn, or being able to grab you and stop your movement. which works pretty well when there's a bunch of different enemies in the fight. The elites and bosses are when it gets interesting. There are 3 different areas in the game, each with 3 elites and 2 bosses. All of the elites have some unique mechanics, even though Assassin and Ghost Armor are basically the same fight, with 4 out of 6 bosses being very unique, and 2 of them just being big, hard-hitting motherfuckers. There's also a secret final boss, similar to the Corrupt Heart and Slay the Spire, but they're way less annoying to get to. You just have to do a special fight in the final area. However, somewhat nullifying the difficulty is the fact you're able to save scum like crazy, something I'm very, very guilty of. As long as you don't die in the fight, you're able to return to the menu and continue the game from before you started the fight, meaning you can either choose to do the fight again, but make different choices in the fight, or just do a different thing. If you're not a fan of this, you can just turn on hardcore, which disables it. Just practicing while editing. There's only like 30 runs of this game on speedrun.com, so if you're big on that stuff, you might be able to set a record. I don't know, not really sure how hard it is. The game does have its problems though, the biggest one being repetition, which is very worrying for a roguelike. Roguelikes are very much built on repetition, and if the game can't do it well, you end up with a pretty bad roguelike. I've played the game for 50 hours, which is actually a decent amount for a single-player game, but isn't very high compared to games like Wizard of Legend, Slay the Spire, or Dead Cells. Although, it's unfair to compare any game to Dead Cells, because Dead Cells is basically peak roguelike. The game just doesn't have as much stuff in it. There's only 136 cards, as opposed to Slay the Spire, which has over 350, and the different weapons and accessories just don't have the same impact that a lot of the relics in Slay the Spire do. I just don't think you get the same longevity from Outer that you would from other roguelikes. The reason why this game has these issues with repetition is due to how the devs focus their efforts during development. Unlike all the other roguelikes I listed earlier, this game's character customization is lacking. Even with the build variety, a lot of builds have overlapping cards and items, and a good chunk of the builds just won't be interesting for some players. But, while the build variety is lacking, the enemy design is excellent. The movement in the game allows for the devs to give the bosses more varied, more engaging mechanics, as well as more ways to not just play around them, but also to use them against your enemies. Unless you don't get movement cards in, in which case get f***ed. Making enemies hit each other is just incredibly satisfying, especially on the higher difficulties where enemies hit like trucks. Unfortunately, after you've seen the enemies a few times, you know how they work, and since there's less builds in other games, there's only a few ways to play around them, thus leading to the issues of repetition. Despite this issue, I would still recommend the game. Even if you won't play it for as long as some of the other roguelikes, the time you do spend will likely be a good time, and not every game needs to be played for 1,000 hours. The game currently costs £11 on Steam, and way less on discount websites, so if you're a Giga-Chan roguelike enjoyer, I don't see why you wouldn't play this. Okay, and that's the end of the script. So, thanks for making it to the end. This time, none of the footage was from my Twitch channel, because my Twitch chat hates this game for some reason. Still come watch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/GreatsAndArda. I guess I won't be playing this game, because people hate it. I'm pretty sure at the end of this, I'm just gonna put some video footage I have of me vibing to the Giga-Chan theme, because apparently my VTube model was capturing that, and that's really funny to me for some reason. Probably because it's 3 AM. Either way, thanks for watching, see ya.